Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Mini Masterpiece Theater Watercolor Workshop. I'm Shauna Robeson with Creating Space Coastal, and in this video, I'm going to be doing this watercolor of a barn just in time for Father's Day. Well, it is actually Father's Day when I did this. So happy Father's Day to everyone. If you're interested in seeing how, let's get started. All right, so you'll notice that in the picture that I have, the sample, this was actually I took this photo years ago, and you'll notice that I have a black and white, and it's a grayscale gradation of black and white that I did on Photoshop. And the reason that I posted that as well, because I think that especially for watercolor or transparent medium, it's nice to see all of the different values that are in the painting, because you have to work from light to dark with the transparent medium, because once you put the dark, you can't go over with the light. So you do it in layers. So it's good to understand the shapes of the brightest brights and the darkest darks. And so you can do the painting in layers. Now, I'm not going to follow this exactly. I'm going to use what I like, not use what I don't like. For example, I'm not going to try to put this extra building here. I'm probably going to put a fence here. This is not going to be gray. It's going to, it's going to be a little bit maybe golden, maybe some green in there. So, you take creative license with your, oh, I've got a hand raised. Did someone have a question? If you have a question, you feel free to just unmute yourself and you can ask the question. And if you need me to pause the recording, let me know at that time too. Kyle, okay. Was that from earlier or
no? I wanted to ask about, that it looks like a plastic piece that you tape your paper down to.
Oh yeah.
Is that like special? Did you just make that, or is that like something that you got to buy? Like
no, I actually made it. I bought some. Actually, it's just plexiglass that I bought from a hardware store, and I actually cut it down on a table saw. And then you can actually sand the edges to make them a little bit smoother. But I don't think I did that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
But yeah, so you can I just use plexiglass so I can have different sizes, because I do like to tape my paper down. It helps keep it from buckling, because when it gets wet, the paper will buckle, and it kind of holds it in place so that when it dries, it'll flatten a little bit better. But also I like to tape it down to a separate base, because then I can rotate it as I need to. Whereas if I tape it down to the surface, I have to work at it on a specific angle. And the other thing that this allows me to do is I can put something like a roll of tape is a great option. If I want to have it angled, I can put a thicker roll of tape, and then I can have it like an easel. And so that works really well to just give me options. You can even use a clipboard or something, but or cut down a plastic clipboard. But yeah, I just basically bought it from a hardware store. But good question, because other people might be wondering that too. And then I tape it down about approximately 1/4 inch from the edge to give my painting a frame around it, because I like the look of that. But it also, of course, is double duty. It adds a frame to the painting, and it also holds it to the surface. The brushes I'm going to be using, I'll be mixing it up, but I'm just going to show you the ones I have out that I think I'll be using. This is a 3/4 inch flat, and I like to use the flats for washes. And since I'm going to be doing some wet on wet, I'm going to use that for my wash brush. And then I have a smaller flat. And the reason I'm going to be using a flat today is because when working with the planks of the wood, I can use the brush to add the texture to create the plank shapes too. The other thing I'm going to use to create the plank shapes is a cut up credit card. I have 2 sizes. I like to have a variety of sizes of this, but I'm going to be using this to do, some of you have seen me do the scraping. So that's going to help create some texture in the paint as well. So any old credit card or gift card or something like that will work. And It also works good for scraping using the corner, kind of like a palette knife. So, so I have that. And I just have a variety of sizes of round brushes. So just to have on hand in case, first for some details. I have a 6, 8, of course, the sizes vary in different brands, but I have, these are Blick, 6, 8, and 10. I have a 10 synthetic and a 10 that's a sable. And then a pencil. And if you want, you can use a ruler to help draw out the shape of the barn. And in fact, I'm going to use I might use a small ruler. And we're just going to do basics. If you don't want to, you could just hand draw it. It doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, the less perfect it is, the more old the barn looks. So, you know, that's kind of fun. Now, one thing I wanted to tell you, because we're going to start with deciding where things are going to be. So I'm going to decide where my horizon line is. And I'm going to put it about 1/3. And that's what the photograph is actually. So typically you don't want the horizon line right in the middle. You want it to be either at the top third or the bottom third, just the rule of the thirds. So I'm just going to create a light pencil of that, which is even hard for you guys to see because I'm doing it so lightly. And I'm going to do all my pencil very light because I'm not going to be able to erase it. You can't really erase pencil after you paint over it. So all of your guidelines that you do with pencil when you're doing watercolor, just make them really light and usually they'll disappear under the paint. And then, and you don't want to scratch the paper either because you don't want to create that texture in the paper because the paint will interact with that and, you know, and make it either lighter or darker, depending on wet or dry. So I'm creating my horizon line and then my barn, which you can see in the picture. I'm going to use the, well, I'm going to show you from here because I want to show you how to, especially when you're doing anything that's geometric shapes, you want to think about the angles. So this is definitely perpendicular from the horizon line, right? And then you can look at angles on the photo and then redirect them to your page. So by holding your pencil, the angle that you're doing, or you can use a ruler, get at the angle that you're working with on the page, and then go directly to your page so that you're following the angle if you don't want to have to eyeball it. So that helps a little bit. So I'm going to start with just my perpendicular line. And I am going to make my barn a little off center and deciding how high I want it to be. Let's say roughly like that. And then I'm going to go straight from my photo. And it doesn't matter how large your photo is. In this case, I'm doing it somewhat the same size, but all I'm trying to do is figure out the angle that I'm working with. So I can just literally, if I hold it, the correct angle, and then I can go directly to my work. And then I'm going to have a pretty close to the same angle. Now, if you want to figure out exact dimensions, if you're trying to make it really exact, you can do measurements. There's ways of going from small to large and vice versa. And I think I showed this before. It's a tool that actually allows you, it's called AccuC, and you can basically look at your subject on the photo and then make it the size that you're trying to make it on your page. That way you can continue to keep it consistent. Once you set this to a certain dimension, it'll allow you to take a small picture and make a bigger painting. And that's called AccuC. But they have different tools like that out there that are to do that. I'm not going to use that. I'm just going to do some eyeballing. In this case, I'm doing it pretty close to the same size, so I could use that, but I'm just going to do the best to eyeball it. All right, now I want to do this angle. Again, I want to make sure that I'm holding the photograph in the correct orientation to the picture. And then I'm just putting that angle down and then I'm just moving it up to where I'm going. Simple as that. And then this side is also, and I can check, I can say, okay, is that perpendicular to that one? Kind of looks a little bit angled this way because it's not perfectly straight. So if I want to have that sort of odd angle, I can do that, or else I can just make it perpendicular. I think I'm just going to make it perpendicular. Now the top of my roof goes out a little bit. So I'm going to put my line. Oops, when did I dip my, I think I just stuck my pencil in paint. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I did. I just put my pencil in. I think I dipped it over here. You guys probably saw it. I didn't. Well, it's good that it's dark over here because it's going to have some dark paint there. Okay. Now I'm just basically putting in, and this side goes down a little bit down the hill. This side is a little bit longer. So these are just guidelines. I'm not necessarily, you know, going to make it exactly. I'm just putting in some guidelines to help know where I'm putting things. And then this part, this line goes across kind of at an angle because this is taller. And I want it to, I'm going to say right about there. So I'm just creating the line of this lower basement area. And then creating the line. This. Okay, now I'm looking at this top roof line, which goes like about like that. So from the tip of this back, I'm going to create a line that's basically the side of the barn. I'm making a big mess because I have all this paint that's on me. Oh my gosh, I think I have to rinse off my. And of course, I picked the darkest paint to get on there. It's dark blue, and we're making a red brick, or a red, not brick, but a red barn. So this will be fun. I'm going to see if I can. Well, it'll be interesting. I'm going to have these little interesting shadows that are going to show up. So that'll be fun. Okay. And then there's a little bit of a shadow there, but I don't have to draw that in. So the yard kind of, so this is kind of that, let me see, it's hard to show you. So this part here kind of angles up to there. Just kind of getting an idea of where things are, like that. Okay. All right, so now I know where I'm going to be putting the barn, and that way I can paint around it for the background. So what I'm going to start with is the sky, and I'm just going to make sure not to touch inside the barn when I wet this. That way all the paint that I put down is just going to stay in the areas that are wet. You heading out? Okay, I'm going to say bye to my honey. He's off to work. All right. So I'm taking my flat brush, and I'm going to start with just wetting that area around the barn, because I know where. And that's the reason that's a big reason why I put that in, but especially with things that are geometric, I just want an idea. I might be changing exactly what that is, but I just want to know where it's at, because instead of masking it off, I'm going to just work around it as much as possible. All right, and then I'm just going to put a light wash of blue, and I think I'm going to use, let me tell you what blue it is. Here's my palette so I can look at the color names. I think I'm just going to use a little bit of some phthalo blue. A light wash of that, because I can always add more color, but it's harder to take it away. So I'd rather start a little bit on the light side and then layer on more color. This paper doesn't move a whole lot with the, but it dries so quickly. But this is the Canson. It's more of a student grade. It's inexpensive, so it's a good practice one, but it's definitely not as fun to work with as the cotton is. All right, so now I have a nice light wash of blue. And down here, I'm going to make it kind of gold. I might add some greens in there. This was winter time, so, or well, really fall time. So everything's kind of dead, but I don't necessarily want it to look too dead. So I'm going to start with some gold color, like a yellow ochre. There's a nice golden tone. So I'm going to just start with a nice light wash of that. And this time I'm just leaving it dry and just brushing it on. And then I'll get a little bit more strokes, which I want a little bit more variation and the strokes to show up for the ground, because it's a lot more textured than the sky is. Now the ground kind of actually comes up to here, over here. Now, if I use a little bit of blue with that gold, I might get some green tones. So I'm going to try putting a little bit of that. And I'm also going to be putting in some green trees up here. So I'm going to use my, this is, let's say this is a hooker's green. Let's see. Oh, that was the blue that I got. And even though this isn't quite dry, I'm going to just put a little bit of foliage in, because I don't mind if it bleeds a little bit, but I don't want it too wet. It might not even be wet at all. But if it is a little bit wet, that's okay. I don't mind a little bleeding. So I'm just going to try to put, I'm still using my flat brush. I'm just going to basically create like a little pine or something over. Yeah, it's still wet, so it's going to be really soft. It's going to bleed out, and that's okay, because I can add some more layers on top. I'm just adding a little bit of some foliage over here just by tapping and rotating and just making it a little messy. I think I want to even bring that up a little bit higher. There. And then maybe just trying to think about what I want over here. If I want more trees, or I think I'm just gonna, yeah, I think just some more trees over here. Now I'm gonna just change up the green a little bit, you know, use a few different colors of green. You can always mix a little blues and yellows too to get variations. And that's really up here. Just making some. This is the background, so some of it's going to stay really sort of ethereal, really soft, and then some of it I'm going to do some more details. But these are not the main event of this. Now I also want a little bit of little more greens in here, so I'm just gonna put some patches. Just to tie in some patches of green, because again, those are not the main event of the story. All right, I'm going to go ahead now that this is still wet, but it's not completely wet and it's not completely dry. But I'm going to add a little bit more blue, and I want some clouds in there. So I'm just going to see if I can, especially around the edges, I want it a little bit darker. Just change it up a little bit so it's not so. And let it be lighter down at the bottom. And then while it's still wet, I'm just going to you can take a paper towel or Kleenex or something, a cloth, whatever. And I'm just going to bunch it all up, and I'm just going to dab off some of that pigment and create some soft clouds. I don't know if you guys can see that. Let me just zoom in a little bit. So it's just some really subtle clouds. The darker the blue you have, the more visible it's going to be. And I can play more and add some more texture up there with clouds if I want, but those aren't the main part of my story. So I'm not too worried about it. I just want it to be interesting. And we don't have time to do a really complex. So I'm just keeping it simple. You can just, like I said, try to lift as much. I think it's almost too light to see. But you can see some variation in there that gives just a hint that there's some clouds in there. All right, those are gonna take a while to dry. So let's just start working on our main event. And try to be real careful not to touch the wet spots because then the color will bleed into that. To be safe, in fact, maybe I should just do this to be safe so you guys don't follow along in. Because it's tricky. So the safest way is to let everything dry before you try to do that. But you can work on an area, but if I touch even just a little bit in that wet, it's going to bleed that red, which is a very bright color and hard to lift, into that blue, and we don't want to do that. So just to be safe, I'm going to go ahead and dry, and you can dry with just a regular old hair dryer. So let me mute myself for a second while I do that. Now I especially focused my drying around the building. I don't know if you noticed that, but I did a little bit everywhere, but then I did a final just touch up right around the borders of that, because that's the key area that I'm concerned about. Typically I like to let things dry naturally if I can, but we just can't, necessarily do that here. Okay, so now I'm going to start laying in the lightest color that I want here. Now you can see if you're looking at the picture, a lot of that paint has come up. So what we're going to do is lay down the paint, and then we're going to lift it. We're going to create some of that texture with this. So I'm going to, I want it to be a really warm barn red. So let me see what I can do mixing some colors. I think what I'm going to mix together, and I'm using my flat brush because I want to create more, I don't know, geometric brush strokes on that. So I'm going to mix my warmest red, which is the cadmium red, and probably a little bit of maybe some burnt sienna. Let me see how that looks. Play around with some color mixing because I don't have a brick red. That could be like a Venetian red, I think is kind of a brick color, but if you have a brick color, great. If you don't, just warm it up by thinking about color theory, just adding a little bit of yellow and it moves towards that warmer. I'm going to add actually some yellow ochre. Start there. I'm going to start there. See if that. And then I'm going to add a little, what is it, burnt sienna, I think. And again, I use my color sheet because I can see what it looks like on paper. When I look at it in the palette, it's not going to necessarily look at the same. And that's why it's important to create these little painted palettes of whatever your colors are. That's real orangey. I think I might start with that. I might do a couple different layers. And actually, I'm kind of excited about that blue that's there. Because that's going to add some interesting colors in there. Okay. I'm adding a little bit more pigment, a little more red that I'm mixing in there. So I can just get variations in that red. I'm just adding a little bit of different reds and okay. So I'm already getting an interesting shape to that. And now while it's still wet, I'm going to use my smallest and I'm just going to scrape, create some more texture. And then I'm going to use the little corner and even create some more little lines if I can, if it's wet enough. Now we have that dark, the opening there, but I don't care because it's really dark. So I can go over that with the dark color and so putting the red there doesn't matter. I don't have to keep that necessarily open. You can if you want, but I'm going to leave it. All right, so I have a really interesting look going on there. And I'm going to go ahead and work now over here. Work one section at a time because you have to get it while it's still wet. So if you don't have enough time to do that, then it's not going to work. I'm just mixing some more red. Now this red is a little bit darker, a little bit more vibrant because it's not getting maybe as much sun or whatever. So I want to do a little bit more with that. As far as pigment goes, I'm going to make that a little bit more vibrant, just like it is in there. Now over here, it's all white in the picture. Over here, it's cement. So I'm leaving that. I'm not going to touch that with the red. I mean, unless you decide you want to make it red, you can use whatever creative license you want to make it whatever you want. And there's not a lot of texture that's visible. It's a little smoother, but I'm still going to go in and just see if I can put in some little hint of it. See, that dried so quickly, I can't even get it to. I'm going to try putting a little bit more, just because I want to try to put some lines in, a little bit of lines in there. Just to tell that it's planks, you know, just to give it the story. Okay. Now I might even, let's see, I'm going to go with my smallest round brush. This is a 6 squirrel. So I can do some detail. The first detail, I'm going to have to wait till that is wet. I'm going to put in some of the kind of gray look that we have here. And I'm going to do that by mixing complementary colors. And I think what I want to try to do is, let's see, I'm going to see what red and green would look like. Maybe a little bit more on the red. I want a gray. Let's see. If I put this, if I mix red with green, this is the gray I'm going to get. But I think I want a little bit more concrete gray. I'm going to see if I can get. I'm just looking at what these mix with so I can see if I see a color that I like. Otherwise, I might just use, I think I might just use, I'm going to try, I think, this neutral tint I have here. But I want it to be, that might be enough, but I think, let me see what it looks like on my, I want it to be a little on the warm side. I'm going to mix a little yellow ochre with that. A little yellow ochre and the gray and see what I get. Like almost like a kind of a beige color. Let's see how that goes. Now I had too much moisture on my brush, so I just dab. If I'm moving away from the canvas, I'm just dabbing my brush off because I don't want it to. I want a little more control, so I'm just putting that in. And then I want a little bit of texture there too. So I'm just gonna see if I can just scrape out a little bit of, maybe I didn't wait till it's dry enough. It's gotta be like not too dry and not too wet. This is the total Goldilocks moment where if you scrape it's too dry, it's not gonna do anything. If it's too wet, it just the water pulls back in. But I'm just trying to create a little bit of texture in there. Like it's not just a straight surface. It's kind of, you know, it's concrete. It's got some different textures in there. See how that just makes it not so flat? Gives it a little bit of interest. All right, for my darkest shadow, I feel like I'm gonna go in, I like this blue that I've got going on. So I think I'm gonna try to make my shadows kind of that blue hue. It's a nice contrast from that. So I'm gonna see if this is dry enough. This feels dry over here. So I'm gonna start putting my dark line right here, the overhang, create my shadow. And I'm going to start with some indigo, and I'm going to mix it in with that burnt, with the kind of barn red. See if I get a nice gray that will work for that. I think that'll look nice. I don't know if you guys can see that. Let me move the camera over. So I'm just mixing up my indigo with some of that mix that I already had in there of the orange. And it's creating a grayish tone, which is exactly what I'm looking for. But I want enough of it, and I want it dark enough. So I'm just trying to get enough pigment in there. The red tones down the blue just a little bit, but yeah, I think that'll be a nice contrast. And since we already have those blue tones in there, I think that'll work well. Okay, I want to make sure I don't have too much juiciness on the brush because I want control. And notice this, because it's a natural brush, it has a nice, really nice tip to it, but it does hold a lot of pigment. So I'm just going to be real careful. If it starts putting too much, then I'm going to dab my brush off. But I just want to create a nice line along the top there. You can do that with the synthetic, has nice tips too. Don't get me wrong. Synthetics don't hold quite as much pigment. So sometimes when you're using a natural, you touch it down and then it just like runs out, just soaks right in, and you get too much going. Whereas the synthetic doesn't hold quite as much. But for this, that's fine. I don't want too much going down. This is where I'm going to rotate because I have more control from this angle. I really want to create as straight a line as I can, and straight lines are not my forte. Just touching that little tip there. So I want it really thin. I don't want to make it too thick. Better to start thin and build the line than it is to put on too much, because you can't go back. Oops, I'm off camera. If I ever go off camera, feel free to chime in and let me know. So I have to keep looking up to see what's on the screen for you guys. Okay, and this top overhangs a little bit, so I'm just drawing that in with my dark color. All right, now hopefully that feels dry. I can start drawing in this. Now this is a little thicker line. So I think I'm going to go back to, just because I have a little bit more control with my flat brush as going on a straight line. So I think I'm going to go back to that and go back into that gray mix that I made and draw that in. If you touch it down and it starts bleeding down, then you know it's too wet still. So just make sure you dry first. And it's narrower at the down here, and then it gets bigger as it comes here. I'm just following that. If you look in the sample, see how that's wider there, and it goes down. And then the last part that we want to really make this dark is this area here. Let me just straighten this line a little bit. And I'm going to add actually a little bit of some Payne's gray because I want this to be even just darker somehow, just a little bit different and a little bit darker. So I'm going to mix a little bit of, add a little bit of Payne's gray to what I was working with before. And Payne's gray has a little bit of a blue hue as well. Now this is about right here to this part was kind of gray, but I'm just going to leave that. And I'm going to go in with just pure Payne's gray because I want that really dark, saturated. All right. Now there's still a little bit of that wash in my brush, and I'm going to go back into the red because I want it to be mostly red, but with a little bit toned down. Let me show you in mixing. So you can see my palette's just really messy. I leave my palette dirty and then I just kind of work with it because I think it's more organic looking when it's sort of mixed around. So all I did was take a little bit of what was left on the brush. I rinsed a little bit, but there was still some pigment. And then I mixed it with this red here, and it's just creating this sort of subdued red. And that's all I want, just a little subdued red, because all I'm going to do is go in and make these lines here a little bit more prominent. Some of those lines I'm going to make a little bit stand out a little bit more. And I'm basically covering that pencil, those pencil lines. I'm just touching along that real lightly. I don't want it to be too wide. I just want it to be telling me that there's a change up there, and hide my pencil mark. It's barely laying down a little bit. Now there's also some little like breaks. If you look at the picture, there's these little kind of jaggedness here. So I could go in, and I think I'm going to use my round brush because I have a little bit more control. This one is, is wide, so it's a little bit harder to put those in without making it too big. But I'm back to my smallest brush and going back into that same mix that I had, the sort of subdued red. And I'm just going to put in a little bit. Let's see. Actually, you know what? I'm going to make it a little bit darker. So I'm mixing my little red wash that I just used with my gray wash that I made before to make the darkest. So I'm mixing those two because I wanted a little bit darker to make these little shadows down here. So I just want to just touching in. Let me bring this closer. I'm just touching in a few. And it doesn't have to be exactly what's there. It's just, okay, there are some things that make this line a little bit, vary a little bit. So there's some broken boards and stuff. So I'm just making it look old, basically. Same, there's a few up here too. Just a few areas where looks like there's a broken board missing or something like that, just to kind of give it some interest. There's some shadows kind of along this line too, just to highlight the difference between those two areas as well. And now I'm going to put in, there's a little window up there. I'm going to use my small round because it has a little more control. So right up here, I'm not going to put the crow sign because that's my ex-husband's family's name. So I don't want that. I don't want that on there. So I'm just going to put a window, but if you want to put a name, you could put your own name up there. But I didn't leave the white space for that. So I just wasn't planning on putting it in, and that's why it's a little bit, if you were going to put a sign up there, you could leave that white. That just wasn't my plan. Okay. This is right in the center. Now there are some light lines going across there. So I'm going to draw in just the dark part, but I'm going to try to leave a little lighter spot in between these dark shapes, if that makes sense. So see how I'm just leaving a little light there? So my window's bigger because it's really hard to make it that size with these spaces in between. And then there's a little window over here. I could make as many windows as I want. I think I want to make a window. In here. And because this is from an angle, it's really narrow. So it's just a little slit. You're not looking at it from the front, so it's not going to be a square, even though it is a square, but what you're seeing, if you look at the picture, is just a little slit. And that's where sometimes if we try to do it from our mind says, oh, it's a window, and a window is shaped like a square. And then we try to make it look like what we would see, but that's not from the angle we're looking at. So we have to really look at, see what is the shape actually on this picture? What is the shape we're looking at? Not what we know it is in real life. And then I want it to be like there's a door or some kind of like door over here. So I'm just going to make a really, some kind of just interest, like some kind of barn. And I'm not putting I'm not telling the whole story. I'm just giving a hint. There's some kind of entrance or something over there. All right. The last thing I want to add is I want a little fence in there. I think I want to play around with my yard a little bit more though before I do I'm going to add, you go from light to dark, so I'm going to want to play around with some more interest with this background, but then I'm going to put a little fence because that's interesting. And then if you want to add any farm animals, you can do that. I know someone who might add a rooster out there, Mary. Let's see, and I'm noticing also this white spot. So I'm going to play around with the background for a while, let my barn settle, and that way I can look at it again later and see if there's anything else I want to add, any other interesting things. But I like to take a break from it because sometimes I get a new perspective, even just taking a little break and seeing it from, you know, coming at it at a different time. Okay, I'm going to use a larger round brush and just create some more interesting yard, whatever dimensions over here. I'm taking my yellow ochre and just kind of putting in some random color. I'm rinsing it off a little bit, and then I'm just gonna soften those lines a little bit. And now I'm gonna use my, I think, some Prussian blue. Mix that in a little bit. Play around with my trees. Now this is my sable, and it's a size 10, the Blick Master Sable. And I want to start putting in some more little foliage ideas. And I want to let this dry. I'm going to put a little bit of some foliage ideas over here, but I want to let it dry because if I touch it in there, it's going to bleed out because it's still wet. So I'm going to play around with my foliage over here. I'm just going to follow the lines that I already put. I'm just dancing around. So I want it real random. I'm just dabbing. So I want it to stay looking like, and you know, kind of like branches and different foliage. So I don't want to do brush strokes like that because then it'll just be a green blob over there. So dance your brush around, just pick a green, any green, and then we'll just keep using some different greens. Maybe this one. We're just telling a story that there's foliage, different trees, shrubs, whatever. Now I'm just getting a different green. And I'm even going to take a little bit of some blue to create some low lights down in some of the lower areas of the trees, like shadows.
Shauna, can I ask a question, please?
Sure.
Well, I did a really bright red barn, and there's a lot of trees coming into it, the green trees, and I painted the barn already, like you would have painted your barn. So what would happen now if you brought a bunch of those trees into your red? Are they going to turn another color, you know?
Well, if you're trying to say that the tree is in front of the barn, is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay, so, well, of course, if the lightest shade that you did, the first layer is going to show some of that red through, so it's going to subdue your green. But if you put enough layers of green over the top of it, it probably would eventually settle down a little bit. But you know, it is a transparent medium, so there's no guarantee that you're going to get rid of the red coming through once you've laid it down there.
Okay.
So it might be easier to just try to keep the foliage off to the side of the red. If you get it dark enough green, you like I said, you might be able to just mask it, you know, by layering the green on top so dark that it's covering that red.
That would have been a good idea. Mask it. Yes. I didn't do that.
What you would want to do if you were planning to do the trees is to mask it out or to just not paint that area. And that's why it's important to sort of to think about, you know, by looking at your, or having an idea, you know, you could draw in where you want your trees. That way you could say, okay, I'm going to make sure not to put any red here. So it just gives you a guide of how you want to do.
I drew in all my trees, but then I painted over them. So,
Oh, I see.
yeah. So, oh, well, we'll see what happens.
Well, play with it, see what happens. Maybe, you know, it depends
I'll
on
let
the
you know.
green. Some greens are a little bit more opaque than other greens. And depending on how bright red you have, you know, it just really depends. I
Right.
can't make any promises how that's going to go.
'Cause your barn is pretty light. Mine's
It's pretty light, yeah.
pretty dark red.
Right.
Okay.
Mine is pretty light. And I could make it, I could actually, you know, if I wanted to, I could go in and make it a little bit darker.
No, I like it that way. That's the way the
but
picture was.
It's kind of like it, because it's kind of washed out because of the sun. So that's kind of what was going on mine.
Old
But
barn.
if I had more time, I probably would put some more dimension by just adding some more different values of red. That would be fun. And I might even do that still. I might add a little bit more darker red mixed in here, but yeah, give it a try and then tell us the results.
Okay.
See how it goes. I mean, because you're using different paints than I'm using. And like I said, you could do that with, if you were using gouache, for example, then you could, because gouache is not transparent. So you could maybe do, you know, a layer of green gouache or something.
If I don't have green gouache, oh wait, maybe I do. And I have white gouache. Can I put watercolor in there to get it green?
I wouldn't do the white just because it's gonna make your green really, like, the white's gonna be harder to get rid of. Like, you're gonna have really chalky looking green.
Okay.
I think that would be my guess. But without doing it, I'm not positive, but that would be my guess of what that would do. I haven't used a lot of gouaches, to be honest, but I've worked with like the white in watercolors is a little bit opaque. And once you mix that in, it tends to whitewash everything and make it more pastel. And I don't think that's what you're wanting to do. I'm even going to take a little bit of indigo now, and I'm going to put that in the tree line just to even bring in a little bit more contrast there. Again, I don't want these to be the complete highlight. I just want to give some hints, but I want it to be interesting. And the indigo adds a nice contrast and value. Like there's, you know, the shadow. Okay. I think I want to see if I can put in a little bit more of a cloud. So I'm going to play with that. See how it goes. I don't want to do, I want the sky to be settled, but I do want at least, you know, some clouds that stand out. So what I'm doing is I'm making the rest of the areas darker to kind of highlight a cloud, you know, some clouds. Some cloud areas, because I have that light color that I can do that with. So just wanted to make it a little bit more interesting. So I just basically put some blue, and I'm going to soften up the bottom of that just with a wet brush with no paint. And then I do want to bring in a little bit of blue to that, because I feel like it's real white right along the top of that. So just darkening, filling in that. And then now I have a nice, interesting, you know, something over here cloud wise. That's all. Just a little something to make it interesting up there. All right. And then I think I do want to maybe put a little bit of some contrasting lines up in here. Just not standing out too much, but just a little touch of vibrancy just to make a little more contrast. So let's just, not everywhere, just a few spots. Might have to mix up a little bit more red. I think I used up a lot of my red I had mixed. I don't want it to be exactly the same as that red anyway, but and it doesn't have to be all the way down or all the way up, just like dabbing in a little bit of some color, just to, like I said, give it a little bit of some interest. If it's too much, you can dab it off. It does dry lighter, but this is it was laying down a lot. So I just wanted to make sure it's not too much. Just give it some, just more agey look to it, I think. I really want this to kind of soften that corner a little bit. Okay. And I just feel like I want this little line over here to just not be so light. Just softening up that tree line a little bit. So I'm just looking for places that need a little something. Just a little more oomph. I don't like my pencil line here, so I want to darken that a little bit. This line here. Just softening. Trying to get rid of that. Trying to get rid of that pencil line. I'm putting in a little bit of some, I think I'm using a neutral tint and just trying to get rid of that line, but also just create some more interest over here in that concrete wall, that color. This is wet now, so anything I add is going to keep dispersing. So I'm going to wait and put another darker value there, doing some just interesting squiggles over on this side too, just to make it not look so flat. All right. And I think this area is dry, so I think I want to make, maybe I'll make the fence kind of over this way. And I want my smaller brush, more control. Now I want it to be a dark, I'm going to do a dark fence, but I'm going to start with the lightest color that it would be. And I think it's just going to be a wood fence. And I might even start it like right at the corner of this building. That'll hide my pencil line, but I can't touch this right now because it's wet. So I think I'm going to start here, and then it'll be bigger. I'm sorry, it'll be smaller. The posts will be smaller here than they are the closer they are to me. So I think I'm going to kind of have it wind around a little bit and get closer. So the posts are going to get bigger as I do that. So if you're working ahead, that's where I'm headed. So I think I'm going to make a post here, and then I might even make a really close post, like we're looking at it from the fence line. That could be tricky. No, I might try it here. Hopefully you'll understand what I'm, here, let me draw it in first so you can see what I have in mind. So I'm gonna have a post here, just putting a light pencil. And then I'll have a post over here. It gets smaller as I go. Post here, and as I move back, it's gonna be and they're not necessarily, it's not necessarily a straight fence. So it's kind of, and it's going to be kind of crooked and wobbly. So I'm just making like a wooden old fence with maybe some barbed wire that's going to kind of go along here. And it's going to be like a dark wood. So I'm going to start with a lighter brown, well, a lighter value of the brown I'm going to be using. I'm going to be mixing it up a little bit, but I'm going to start with I think I want to start with a raw umber. Raw umber is this color here. Kind of a neutral brown. And I'm not mixing the full, I don't want the full saturation of color yet. So I'm just mixing it up right in the palette, and I'm just going to draw these lines in just to kind of put where my posts are. And I might want them even like, I want them kind of old and, you know, they're kind of crooked and there's going to be one there, but I think that's still wet. Let's see. All right, so that's kind of my fence, my first layer. Now I'm just gonna, and it's gonna dry pretty quickly. I'm gonna go in again with another more saturated, and I'm just gonna, it's gonna bleed into it a little bit because it's still wet. And I'm just gonna put it in there, or it may not because this paper dries so quickly. But the more layers you do, the more interesting it becomes. So even though it's the same color, it's a little saturated color, it's just going to be more interesting because you're going to see the one layer and then this, you know, the stroke, and then and this one I want to be the biggest. Make that a little bit wider. Here. And I could even add a different color around. I just splashed water on my painting. It's not good. And I might even add a little bit of this burnt umber. It's still real wet, so. And then I'm going to make with, I'm going to go even darker than that and use the sepia, which is kind of a browny gray. Let me show you on my palette. This is the sepia here. So it's just kind of a brown, but it has a gray hue to it. And I'm just going to get I want as concentrated, but I want to make sure I don't have a real wet brush because I want a lot of control. And I want to make sure that my tip is nice and fine. And I just want to draw in a line for the bob wire, and they can be kind of crooked, doesn't have to be straight. It's just, you're just drawn, and the wigglier it is, the more old it kind of looks. Should have gone down more. I'm going to see if I can erase that line there. Probably too late. I want this to go down more. I wasn't thinking. I'm going to see if I can lift that other one. I actually have a scrub brush. It's designed for lifting. It's just like a little stubby thing. See if I can get rid of that. See, boom, magic. And maybe I'll even make some lines going off the page like, oh, the fence continues into infinity and beyond. Here we go. I'm just softening that edge a little bit. There we go. Okay. So now I have those, and I feel like maybe I can put a little, you know, you can put in at this size, you could just put in a couple little, if you want some farm animals, you could just like, because they're kind of in the background, you can just create like a little shape of a little rooster, some chickens, you know, whatever you want. I'm doing smaller stuff because it's easy.
Hey, Shauna,
Yeah.
just a quick question. Is this video going to be on your YouTube channel later by any chance or no?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
It's really pretty. I'd like to watch it again because I really am terrible at watercolor. So, but it's really pretty.
Well, thank you. And I would encourage you to reframe your thinking and say, I'm just learning watercolor and I'm progressing.
A very good idea. You're right. I should do that. I'll work on that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's see, maybe I'll put one a little closer here. Anyway, you can put whatever animals you want, but I think we're at 3:30 and I want to leave it open for some show and tell. I feel like though I feel like these are all too uniform. So I feel like I need to just put some other different color things in. They're just like little animals. I don't know. I'm not sure I like animals. I want to just hint that they're there, but I don't want them to be too dominant. So I'm just gonna, I don't know, mix up the color a little bit, maybe like something there. It's too small to know what they are, but there's something in the yard. Okay. Let me back this up a little bit. I feel like, yeah, I think I'm going to just leave, you know, you could do more with the trees, but then that makes them a little bit more prominent. And I don't want to do that. I think really the story is about the barn. So everything else is sort of secondary. So, you know, I think I'm just going to call it and be done. Thank you everyone for joining me for another episode of Mini Masterpiece Theater Watercolor Workshop. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you find this content helpful. And as always, happy creating. Bye. Thank you.